welcome back to Dear Career. I'm Tiana, your host. This is the podcast where I take career topics and my real life experience and I get you to where you want to be. So today's topic, we are going to get into the topic of, are you quietly quitting? Okay, so let's get into it. I wanted to discuss this topic because I've had clients that I've worked with who have quietly quit and they didn't realize they were doing it. This concept of quietly quitting, I think, is something that maybe people aren't always aware of. There was a period of time when it was coming up a lot for people, especially after the pandemic, and people were feeling really tired and fatigued and just burnt out. This still happens, of course. But are you recognizing that this is something that might be happening to you? So I'm guessing if you're listening to this episode, this is something that might be coming up for you and you're not quite sure. So I have some things that I kind of want to talk about or talk through that might be helpful for you if you're in that place and you're not sure what to do or you need to kind of figure it out. So my first thing that I wanted to bring up is, what does it mean to quietly quit? Really, what this means is that you're disengaged and you're doing the bare minimum. And you know how I feel about being in a workplace that you're engaged in. And I'm the employee engagement queen over here. So I advocate for candidate experience and I advocate for employee engagement. Some of those things might not be happening for you, whether you're in an interview process, or you're actively in a working role. You might not be engaged because of the work environment or whatever experience that you're having. Maybe a personal things happening that is causing an impact to your work. I don't know what it is, but just knowing what it means to quietly quit, I think, is the first step in knowing where you're at with any kind of process like that. Now, sometimes quietly quitting may mean that it's going down a direction of a performance management issue if it's impacting poor performance, if it's impacting your work and you are becoming a poor performer. It could be that while you may be quietly quitting, the employer decides that they want to move forward with termination. But it could also mean that you're so disengaged that you eventually leave yourself. Now, I was able to find a little bit of data that I thought might be helpful to support this. In 2024, 64% of employees consider themselves as a quiet quitter. This is, I don't know when you're listening to this, but I'm recording this in 2026. So it's a little bit older, but I don't think the numbers are that far off. There's so much happening here in the US and mentally. And, I tend to have my topics when it comes to mental health. And so the workplace is a big chunk of our life, and we spend a big chunk of our time in the workplace. And so more and more employees are feeling the mental load of a heavy workload, but also personal things and things outside of work that are causing mental strain, and they're bringing it to the workplace. So as you know, I'm going to advocate for mental health, but I really don't know that this number has gotten any better. Potentially may have gotten worse. 64%, that's more than half of employees. So that's a lot of employees that are quietly quitting. And it's really sad if you want to put it that way. It is pretty sad to know that that is something that people have to go through and that they're experiencing. Now, in that same study, 36% of these quiet quitters reported that their manager was the reason for or influenced their poor work ethic. That's also really sad. Now, if you don't know this, I'm going to state this here. I've said this before in other episodes, and I like to talk about management because I have been a manager and I love managing, but I also love training managers, especially new managers. But I know I'm the first one to tell you that it is a lot of work and it is not an easy job to manage people. And so if you're listening to this, likely you've had an experience where you've had a poor manager. I've also had experiences where I've had not great managers. and, one that was very, very difficult. I've talked about that before as well. But not everyone's meant to be a manager. And sometimes people are just not good people managers and they're in those roles. And sometimes it's because they thought that's what they were supposed to do next. And I have a whole episode about why you don't have to be a people manager to advance. So, that I'm very much a supporter of good management. And a majority of individuals who leave the workplace are leaving because of poor management, unfortunately. People may love their position, but they will leave a poor manager before it is that they're actually leaving an organization. Poor management really makes the work experience what it is. Now, the next kind of question I wanted to get through and kind of talk about, while we are clear on what quiet quitting is, the digging deeper question becomes, well, why? Why does that happen? And we just talked about poor management, but tied to that is disengagement. Disengagement can happen because of a number of different reasons. Like I've said, poor management is a big part of that. I'm going to get into what that can look like, but there's so many different pieces to employee experience that if you're feeling this way that you're quietly quitting, I would really like to invite you to think about if you're experiencing any of these other areas as well in either your current work environment or within your workload. So, part of disengagement can look like a lack of recognition. Employees who feel like their work contributions are not recognized are going to become disengaged right away and eventually leave, especially if it goes on for a long period of time when they feel like they're putting in a lot of work and either somebody else is taking credit for the work or nobody's recognizing it at all. Are you in that position? Is that happening for you? It's a good question to ask. Another reason for disengagement is the money reason, the reason why a lot of clients come to work with me. Frustrations in compensation. Either you're not getting paid enough, or maybe your pay is inequitable to, you found out potentially is inequitable to another peer or someone who works side by side with you. It's below market rate potentially. All of these things can be contributors to disengagement when it comes to salary. Salary is a big motivator for individuals, especially women, because women already get paid less than men here in the US. To see and recognize that, especially if you have a male counterpart who's doing the same work as you and they're getting paid more, absolutely that's going to lead to disengagement. Is that happening for you? Another question to evaluate. Now, along with the poor management piece of disengagement looks like a poor work-life balance. So if you're continuing to get a really heavy workload and you don't really have any time to come down from that, and you are constantly working more than the regular 40 hours a work week, like how we have here in the US, but you're continuing to put in hours in the evenings, on the weekend, it's like you're on, and you can't really turn off. That can lead to a poor work-life balance. Ultimately, poor work-life balance leads to burnout. Burnout happens when you have so much work on your plate that you become unproductive because you can't contribute any further. Another form of disengagement under a management function, as a manager would contribute, is lack of growth opportunities. So are there any promotion opportunities for you? Is there any ability for you to advance? Have you been able to talk to your manager about that? Is that something that's being encouraged, or is it looked down on and disencouraged? Definitely something to think about. Are you feeling stagnant, or is there really just limited growth um, or is there really just limited opportunities for growth? Now, this last reason I have for disengagement is absolutely a contributor from management and poor leadership would be a toxic work culture. As you know, if you've been following my story, I also worked in a toxic work environment with a very toxic manager, and that was very tricky and very uncomfortable. So much so that I had to leave the workplace and leave that job. The toxic work culture can look like micromanagement, favoritism, lack of support, things like that that are really becoming very heavy in the workload and you're experiencing on a regular daily basis. Now, if you've been following me and been listening to episodes, you know how much I care about work culture and green flags. I've talked about green flags in your interview process. Work culture, employee engagement are so important to me. So, of course, I have the data that is going to back that up a bit. So, I'm always on LinkedIn, and I found a repost from the Harvard Business Review. This was a study that was done in 2024. So, again, a little bit outdated. It's still not, some of this data is not going to be updated in just a couple of years. It'll take 5 to 10 years for this kind of data to be updated. We can revisit topics like this in another 5 years if we need to look at the data again. But from this study, there were over 13,000 employees that were surveyed. This data showed really clear patterns around poor employee experience that was creating toxic work culture and created an environment where there were 4 times more quiet quitters than other work environments. Now, where there were strong employee experiences, it became the opposite. Only 3% of employees were quietly quitting. And in the toxic work environments, only 20% of employees would give extra effort or go above and beyond. Whereas in more engaged work cultures, 62% of employees regularly gave extra effort or went above and beyond. Now, that's quite a difference. Now, this repost was done by WorkVivo, and in this repost, there was a pyramid of quiet quitting. And so I thought it'd be really great to talk about that because it did have the top 5 reasons for quiet quitters. So, their first reason for quiet quitting was lack of communication. And I'm really big on communication nerd slash major over here. So communication is such a big thing for me. And that totally makes a lot of sense. With the lack of communication, it means that it's really important for workplaces to give a voice to their employees. There needs to be a two-way stream of communication where employees can also give feedback to the employer and it's received. Communication can't just be top down. It needs to also filter upward. In the best work environments that I've worked in, there was always a way for employees to give feedback. And from an HR perspective, I was always able to address that feedback directly or company-wide in a way where people understood that their concerns were being heard and we were making changes. Now, the second reason for quiet quitting, according to this pyramid, is no sense of belonging. This has to do with some of that psychological safety that happens in the workplace because we spend so much of our time in the workplace. Psychological safety is so important and people want real meaning at work. So they want a sense of purpose and they want to not only belong to a team or a group, but they want to feel like their contributions also belong. And overall, they belong to the company because their work matters. And tied to that is the third reason for quiet quitting, according to this pyramid, is feeling undervalued. Being valued as an employee is so important, and recognition cannot be handled just once a year. Recognition needs to be an ongoing feeling and contribution from a manager perspective. So employees really feel like their contributions matter once again. And to that, if you are not getting recognized every day in some kind of way, or feel like you're getting some kind of recognition or validation, that could be leading to where you're becoming disengaged. And like I said before, employee engagement is so important. Really, the perspective of every employee matters. People are people. Now, the fourth reason for quiet quitting is inconsistent leadership. When there's a rotation of leadership or managers are going in and out, or even as an employee, if you are moving from manager to manager to manager, you're automatically going to be disengaged because there's been no investment in you. Leaders who are showing through actions and actions speak louder than words, but they're showing through negative actions. Employees don't want to follow leaders that are showing negative actions. When there is a culture where leadership is making very few promises, but they're able to keep their promises, it's more highly received than if managers or leaders are making tons of promises and unable to keep any of them. And that leads to the last reason why people quit on this pyramid, and that is zero trust. Coming back to that psychological safety piece, psychological safety in the workplace is so important. And if you're not understanding why you're feeling so disengaged, this, I would say, it's something that happens slowly over time and may not be so obvious. So check in with yourself on, how do you feel in your work environment? Do you feel like you are safe? What I mean by that is, are you safe to speak up when you need to? Are you safe to advocate for yourself? Are you safe to ask questions? Are you safe to admit mistakes? Are you able to offer ideas without feeling like you're going to be humiliated or embarrassed or punished or even negatively judged? Or are all these things that you're experiencing in a negative way? If there are things that you're experiencing in a negative way, likely this is a place that you're not feeling psychologically safe. If you can't open up interpersonally, or you can't communicate well in this work environment, it's just another sign to evaluate your psychological safety. How are you feeling there? Okay, now that I've gone through all that, that was kind of a lot to talk about. This episode is a little bit longer than my norm, but I thought it was really important to break some of that down, especially if you're in that place where you're not sure what to do next, or you're not feeling particularly confident in your work environment, and you don't know if you are quietly quitting, or are you quietly quitting, and maybe you do know and you don't want to admit it. It's okay. You're not alone. There's so many people who go through this, and being in a toxic work environment is not fun. And it's not worth your mental well-being, I will say. So now that you're more informed, if you didn't know before now, I invite you to reflect on anything that I talked about today, and please share in the comments some experiences you've had. I'd love to hear a little bit more about them. You can also leave me a message in my speak pipe if you want to leave me any questions or anything that you're feeling like you need support with, so I can answer them on an upcoming question and answer episode. But please, I want you to just take care of yourself. If any of these things that I talked about today are resonating with you, I want to encourage you to take the time that you need to figure out for yourself what is next. And if any of my other episodes can help you, please go listen to them. But also I'm hoping that this information here was helpful for you today. Thank you so much for listening in. Again, share your comments, share this insight with anybody you feel like it might help, especially if you're feeling disengaged, but you also may have a peer who's also feeling the same way. I hope that this can help you and serve you. Until the next time, I'll see you again in the next one. And take care of your mental health and mental well-being. That's it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.